It was kind of just open season, go fight and win.
Yep.
And that was nice. That was a lovely experience. At the end of the day, if they want to tell you to shove it where the sun does not shine, you're out of luck. I'm not throwing shade at anybody. Turns out the mid-tier alliance was correct. And now the mid-tier alliance gets rolled along with the major alliance. I am not signing them under the understanding that, oh, now that I'm allied to Rose or to TKR, I can start pushing them to act in this way. Congratulations, you're dealing with 2,000 pings. How are you? You're not going to handle that. No one can handle that. In hindsight, would have handled that differently, just on the basis of general decency.
All right, so can you tell me a little bit about who you are, how long you've been playing this game, which alliances you've been a part of, which positions you've held, all that good stuff?
Absolutely. So I have been playing where actually a good chunk of players today joined. I was one of the ones who caught Drew Durnell or Durnell or however you'd like to pronounce his YouTuber name, his video on politics and war, and I watched it, and it was just something that popped up, and I was like, well, I'll give this a shot. And so I've been playing since the summer of 2020, which has been almost a full 5 years now. And originally, I had the pleasure of being one of the Nano children. I was in one of the Nanos, and honestly, it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. We didn't have that many members. It was called Kalmar Union, but I eventually got into government. There was no Discord. It was just all in-game messages, as it was at the time. And we grew to actually be pretty sizable for a smaller alliance. We got up to 17 members, I want to say. Made the mistake of merging with Schrute Farms, and that kind of fell through after people got over there. And so I left to, gosh, I want to say the Amar Empire. Is that what that was?
I honestly
One of
don't
Sweet
know.
Storm's. Yeah, it was. I think it was a TKR prot. And it was run by Sweet Storm, who ran Mom's Friendly Robot Company, although that is no longer with us either. And I eventually became head of internal affairs there. And then there was some internal drama that led to me leaving. I believe that is when I joined TKR. That is the only kind of major alliance I have ever been in, was TKR. And I was there for the dissolution of Quack. And that was quite possibly, probably a top 3 time in my having played this game, was fighting in TKR as part of Quack in that war where the rest of the game fought against us. So after that, I kind of floated around and did my own thing for a while. Started a micro, disbanded the micro. Eventually, after doing some raiding and that kind of stuff, ended up helping out. I think it was called Band of the Falcon, which was a smaller raiding alliance. We merged with Rome after they split. And this was not Tiberius's Rome. This was the other one under, God, I can't even remember the name. He goes by unknown identity now, I believe. And we formed Imperium of Man. After that, I moved up to be in House Stark, and that is where I am to this day. So I've led micros. I've been kind of I've done EA, MA. I'm currently FA, but a very long and varied journey to get where I am.
Indeed, that is quite the essay for only, what was it, 5 years? Politics and War now?
Yeah, not that long.
If I recall correctly, you've been in House Stark for a while now, so you've been there since like at least over a year, right?
Yeah, alliance seniority is apparently just a mechanic to lie to people.
Yes, you probably
That or I may have had
of
I may
course.
have had to go create an offshore or something. I gosh, officially I want to say almost 2 years ago. I'm fudging the numbers here because a lot of this stuff happened in like June, July, September, and we're close enough there that I can start rounding up by a couple months. I want to say probably end of summer 2023 is when I
Hmm.
joined House Stark. So yeah, I've probably I would say this is the alliance I've been with the longest.
You mentioned the war in TKR. That was, in your mind, the best experience you've had in this game?
So I'm not going to call it the best because there have been other things that I've done that have been a lot of fun. Working within House Stark has
Hmm.
been just truly a pleasure. But in terms of like single greatest moments, it's definitely in the top 3. I thoroughly remember because I think I was a city 10 at the time. TKR does the internal leaderboards for various tiers, and so I remember doing really well in the war. Honestly, I like I said, I had a blast. I don't remember ever getting dragged down or zeroed, and I do remember a lot of coordination and successfully defeating a lot of people uh, on the battlefield.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely noticed that especially the micro tier, there's a lot of mistakes and inactives that if you're a good player or someone who's like listening to orders in a good alliance, you can definitely get away with a lot, and you can actually rebuild a bunch of mill, and people don't really keep you down that well because all the good players are higher city counts and
The
they're
nice
unable
thing
to scale
too,
on you. Sorry. Yeah.
you don't get any direction either. Like there are general war orders,
Hmm.
but realistically, I mean today it's C20 and below. Nobody cares about anything going on under C20.
Hmm.
But at that time C10 was that range. And so while you'd occasionally get a war order, it was kind of just open season, go fight and win.
Yep.
And that was nice. That was a lovely experience.
In terms of war, that's peak PNW. It's definitely the start of the game. I think we're both in agreement on that.
Mhm.
Now, I don't want to go too much into depth about FA stuff because I mean I know that's what you're doing right now, but I do want to ask how you would describe your experience in FA in a House Stark. Does it feel like you're able to do much as a smaller alliance, especially since you've mostly been in smaller alliances besides the PKR stunt? Do you think
So
that you can actually achieve anything meaningful or like have a say in the broader picture as such a smaller alliance?
so I had, which I'm sure we'll get to. I had a bit of a rougher start when it
Mhm.
comes to being a head of FA.
Yeah.
Um, and so we spent a little bit of time getting back on our feet after that. And I'll be the first to admit that was a tougher period of time, and that was something that
Mhm.
was solely on me. Since that point, especially now, I am increasingly optimistic when it comes to what is ahead of House Stark. When we fought House with Eclipse Sphere last year, towards the
Oh
middle of
dear.
the year,
Yeah.
and that would have been against you, I believe, if you were still
Indeed.
in the Sword Coast. Um, we did really well. I was really proud because I hand kept track of beige cycling stats
Mhm.
using Borg's bot, his stats site, and we were real until everybody kind of gives up on beige cycling, which happens throughout a war. Like eventually, the other side stops fighting back, and so you don't need to beige cycle.
Mhm.
Um, but while beige cycling was actively going on, we were one of the top alliances in that coalition for not beiging defensives and for properly cycling.
Interesting.
And so if we actually, I'm going to pull up Krampus's
he's got
stat site.
he's got the
Yeah, well,
receipt.
I'm not gonna boast without having the receipts here. So,
You can send a screenshot as
bind.
well in the DMs, and I can probably edit it in.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me pull this up here. Yeah, this was the war. So I know people don't like to go by net, which I understand. Most of the time, net is just you go between net or inflicted depending upon what favors you the best. So we were we were only about 3.8 billion behind Legion of Dawn in net. And keep in mind, House Stark does not have city 40s. Our highest city count member during that period was City 35. So we did not get access to the 3,000 or 4,000 infra City 40s. We had to do that damage without access to that. But if you're somebody who's not in favor of net, which I understand, we were also 10th on inflicted, and we were just ahead of Weebinism, about even. And I don't make these comparisons to diss on Legion of Dawn or Weebinism. Like both of them, Legion of Dawn, is actually part of my ally Spectre. But I make it to make the point of what I was trying to say, which is for an alliance that was looked down upon in terms of our fighting capabilities, we did really well, especially for not having a single City 40 or being able to fight in that tier whatsoever. For the rest of the question, which was, can we affect things? The honest answer is not really. You can talk to people, you can make suggestions, you can point out that what they're doing is good or is not good. But at the end of the day, if they want to tell you to shove it where the sun does not shine, then you're out of luck. And you just kind of have to go along with it. And one of the things that I find increasingly talking to people, mid-tier alliances across the game, I'm not throwing shade at anybody. I want to preface this right now. But I am tied to a lot of mid-tier alliances, so I should be able to talk on this, being tied to people like Arkham, Sword Coast, and then an entire sphere of mid-tier alliances that's tied to Spectre. I would encourage the macros to be a little more just open their ears a little bit more to what their mid-tier allies are saying. Because I have heard story after story after story where not a major, so a lower level ally of one of these major alliances like Rose or TKR or somebody else, just to use examples, not to put any shade on those alliances, these lower tier alliances will tell their major tier alliances, hey, you shouldn't do X because if you do X, this is what's going to happen. Or so-and-so is gearing up to roll us with a coalition. We should proactively address this, or we should militarize to address this. They get disregarded. Their advice goes in the trash bin. And then in 3 months, or next week, depending upon if it's an impending war, it turns out the mid-tier alliance was correct. And now the mid-tier alliance gets rolled along with the major alliance because the major alliance decided that they didn't want to listen to the mid-tier alliance.
Interesting.
That is something that I have heard from alliances in every sphere of the game, except for maybe Eclipse, which could just be recency or could just be bias in terms of who I talk to, but also could just be that Eclipse really has mastered the FA of this game, and so they would be more likely to maneuver that in a unique way relative to how other people do. That's not shade on anyone, that's just fact, and if you take it as shade, you're not paying attention to the game. So,
right. Well, Sorry, go on. I'll just finish.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, well, to challenge it a little bit, obviously recently there was a few times where a major got rolled, where they weren't milled, but before that, since I've been playing the game since around 2022, I've not seen many times where one side got caught off guard. Obviously it happened recently, obviously it happened to TKR at one time. The majority of majors I've seen have been milled up in a majority of wars.
Increasingly, it has become common practice that everybody generally mills up until a war kicks off. The exception to that actually would be this war, because Eclipse has not militarized. and did not militarize as the rest of the game militarized in preparation for what was going on. So there are occasions where it has happened before. Like the common example that often gets used is there was one war that I remember where Rose didn't militarize and they got hit. But that's more of, you're right, it's less of a common example. In general, though, there are broader situations where people will say, hey, so-and-so is going to hit us, or if we do this, this is going to present a problem for us. Again, I'm not throwing things around, but One Day War was voted worst FA move for a reason. Like, there are occurrences where some people have said, hey, let's watch out, and it tends to get ignored. And so I don't want to go into specific examples too much again, because I'm not trying to call people out. It's not a thing that any one person does. It's a thing that a lot of alliances do, where they just, majors are majors for a reason, and so they operate under their own FA knowledge and conceptions, and it's just the way it is. But if I had one thing that I would say is, yeah, I think that some majors treat their mid-tiers a little bit better than others do, which is, of course, a variation on who you have as FA and the rest of that. But in general, I would argue that the mid-tiers and that smaller-ish alliance definition, your meaningful input is in who you tie. It's not in directing your ties. So, like, if I sign Rose or if I sign TKR, that is my meaningful input on the game's direction, is that I have chosen to align myself with this alliance's FA vision or their FA actions. And I am not signing them under the understanding that, oh, now that I'm allied to Rose or to TKR, I can start pushing them to act in this way. That's generally not how it works. But in general, my experience kind of leading FA and House Stark has been very positive. I'm in almost constant communication with Ataxi and Samani to make sure that I know what it is that we are trying to achieve. And I help out where I need to within the alliance. If IA needs an extra hand, I will do my best, even though I fully admit that is the one area of government I do not enjoy doing. But MA, like, our MA guy had to step out, wasn't actually able to be there for that war that I mentioned, where we fought with Eclipse against House. And so I was the MA. I stepped in and I ran MA myself for a significant portion of the war until our MA was able to come back and run things. And I got a kick out of that. That's another top 3 experience right there. That was just, that was great.
I can second that. That MA is very underrated, especially if you know what you're doing. Because it's funny that war you mentioned was. I don't want to make it too much about myself. I'll briefly say that war you mentioned was probably my rough start, as you will mention. But especially after that, just coordinating, strategizing on MA,
especially when the members aren't being problems. Which they can be. I'm sorry to any normal members who watch this, but the rank and file can be a pain in the arse to deal with sometimes. House Stark specifically during that war was a dream come true. So I was able to fully coordinate at every level our MA, which is why we had such a low level of phase cycle violations relative to everybody else, is because that is something that, full credit, the members earned that one. That was an amazing experience for me, and I hope it was great for them too, because we kicked ours.
Especially the early war. Almost entirely the early war. That's where the fun in MA lies.
Yeah.
And I feel like it definitely also helps being in a smaller alliance, just being able to do things well. In my experience, MA in a smaller alliance is a lot more fun than in a bigger alliance. You're a lot less stressful and you can optimize a lot more. You can probably imagine that if you're leading an alliance of like 200 people, then it's impossible to monitor everyone properly, and you have to really be able to trust your fellow MA folk, and that sometimes can be a bit stressful. I'll say from experience, but
Yes, I'm in full agreement. I'm in full agreement. Everybody those were my orders. Was everyone had to ping me at a certain spot in their wars before
Mhm.
they could continue on. And it's one thing to deal with, because again, too, people can have, if they want to, up to, it was at that time 8, now it's like 9 or 10, up to that many wars going simultaneously. And so it's not just, oh, you're going to get 40 pings. Well, no, it's actually going to be upwards of like 300, 350.
Yeah.
And so I could handle that, and I had a blast handling that with House Stark. But if you're dealing with like Rose or somebody that's got like 100, 200 members, congratulations, you're dealing with 2,000 pings. How are you? You're not going to handle that. No one can handle that.
Indeed.
Not solo. Indeed.
But yeah, smaller alliance, MA, a lot of fun if you know what you're doing. And safe to say, I did not know what I was doing during the war you mentioned. You live and learn, and that's also part of the game, right? You make mistakes,
Yes.
and I think you probably relate to that, which we'll probably get to. Oh, actually, right now probably.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
I mean, we've kind of talked about it a little bit already, but like, are there things during your time as FA you're proud of or regret? And I think you've mentioned quite well that you're proud of your performance in Casino Royale with Eclipse rolling House. Do you have any more things similar, or?
So I'll go ahead and say this too. I regret that war.
Interesting.
I had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back on it, I think it was something that House Stark needed as an alliance to shake off what I will talk about here shortly.
Mm-hmm.
But I do regret it. I was on good terms with TKR. I was on good terms with Grumpy. Didn't talk to the Sword Coast much, but generally on good terms with you guys. I should take that back. I was talking with you guys a lot, actually, at that time. And that's one of the lessons, I think, too, of FA, is if you're going to do something, you better have a damn good reason for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's to somebody that you like. If it's to somebody that you hate, you don't need a reason. You can just say, well, screw them. If it's to somebody you're on generally good terms with, you know, I would have to really think about it on whether or not I would have done that again, because I liked them and I feel like they were generally okay with us. And I think our participation in that war shook that up a little bit, where now, I mean, again, it's been many months since then.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to think that we're back on a different path. But going back, would I disrupt those relationships in the name of, well, House Stark just needs a good war? I would really have to think on that. But what I was talking about, and what I've mentioned a couple times here, in what we had to shake off, was I was the singly responsible reason that we got hit by Singularity when we did, which was end of 2023 area.
Yeah, around
Gosh,
October, I think.
it's hard. It gets really hard to keep track of the exact month, but probably last few months of 2023, I want to say.
Yeah, something like that.
After which they hit all those other mid-tier alliances, and then there was the general war that they fought against Stale, which then turned into the one-day war, but all a bunch of fun stuff for later. I would have handled that a little differently. I was more provocative in Ron than I should have been. Not really an excuse for that.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit exactly on what happened, or roughly what happened?
Well, so I own Royal Orbis News, which I know we'll also get to, and Singularity was a leaky boat at that time. They had somebody who would just send me guides, announcements, and as Royal Orbis News, those got posted. And so I was with most of Ron. I was more than happy to make fun of Singularity over that. And, there's a mix of a couple things here. as as one of those mid-tier alliances, you have to conduct yourself differently. You know, like if it was, I'll just say, if it was Krampus that had been doing that, the consequences and the circumstances around that would not have been the same.
For sure.
I was also at the time unaware of, shall we say, Singularity and Rose's close working relationship, and so Singularity was able to leverage that to have Guardian cut us. And so we were a much easier target than I
anticipated.
Realized. Correct. But beyond that, I should not have handled it the way that I did, which is why I generally... You don't... See, this is the other thing. Making fun of an alliance while they're having those issues, I mean, it's... Singularity can be quite controversial, but in general, you want a variety of success, which is why hearing, like, for example, that TI might be back on the upswing is great, because when you have more major alliances that are actively participating in the game's politics, then there are more axes for things to move around, and we don't end up like in the bipolarity we almost just had. So
I'll get to as well.
Yes, we will. We'll get to that too. There's a lot of things to get to. But I would have handled that differently going back. Some of that too was just not, like, genuinely was not worth posting, and was posted to antagonize them. Fully admit. But yeah, in hindsight, would have handled that differently, just on the basis of general decency.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation.
It was
language.
It was a time that we then had to recover from, because that's the other thing. Everybody loves to hate on an alliance when they're down.
Oh, for sure.
So I was part of that with the Singularity leaks again. Admit it. But then when you get rolled,
and then it happens to you.
Yeah.
Then it's a lot less enjoyable.
Like, well, yes, but then especially when you're a mid-tier, like right now, at the time of this interview, there's been a lot of crapping on Rose, because Rose has been in a rougher spot these last few months. And so, but this is something where it's not a one-off performance, it's consistent. Whereas if Camelot had a terrible performance this war, or TI had a terrible performance this war, or UPN had a more noticeably bad performance this war, you know, if a mid-tier had a more noticeably bad performance, because you're a mid-tier, there are more people that can replace you, and so you have a lot longer of a time period to recover your reputation before other people will sign you, because you're not, like, you don't have the cities or the members that somebody like Rose or somebody like TI or Event Horizon or TKR, you don't have their members or their city counts, and so people don't need you in that way. If people think they can leverage you in that way, which they can for those greater alliances, then they'll keep their mouth shut, or they'll be faster to forget.
I can definitely see that being the case. I feel like that sort of Call of Hate close to home had things worked out differently, because there was also a time, I believe, where we were in a... Well, I can't speak for Michael, but we were in a similar boat as to where you guys were in.
A lot of alliances have been.
Yeah, once you're in that position, you've been in that position of getting completely, well, kind of piled on for, well, a bad performance or something like that. I feel like if that happens, you're kind of more likely to, you start to understand that, you know, maybe we should have been a little bit more careful with what we were doing.
Right. TSC, I believe, has been in a not so fun position before. Legion was in a rough spot after their leader tried to coup, and that got resolved. They floated around for a minute. FSO has been in and out of rougher spots, which is why I was happy to pick them up. And they've turned into actually a pretty, they've been a pretty good ally. And so I want to make a special note of that, because they have improved, and they've improved noticeably. So
Great to hear.
A lot of times it's just one bad performance, and it can take a long time to get in a spot where you can have a good performance. Because, like, if nobody signs you and you're floating paperless, then ARG is going to hit you when you're already demoralized. And so then you're dealing with Raiders, which doesn't look good. And then, like, it's just, it's really easy once you've been kicked once to keep getting kicked.
I want to say though that I think people have become now, especially now that the game has kind of declined a bit in player base, that people have become more wary of doing that though. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's always a portion of the game that's willing to sign those folks. Like, take note, the Lost Mines is signed to TKR. I love them, but a lot of what you would call the reject alliances, which for a hot minute there was House Stark. World Task Force floated for a minute. You know, you got, like, a lot of the people Spectre has signed in that side sphere, one would call the reject alliances. A lot of them are great. Like, I love World Task Force. Love them to death. They have improved. They are, again, heaps of praise on World Task Force specifically, because they get a lot of hate, and it is absolutely no longer deserved. But there are a lot of these situations where, yes, you have these quote-unquote reject alliances, or these alliances that aren't broadly approved of, and yet increasingly now, as you said, with a declining player base, there is a need for them. And when you have need of somebody, you do your best not to kick them too hard.
No, definitely. And I'm honestly glad people are starting to see that, because I always kind of felt like public antagonizing and not antagonizing. I mean, public shaming, I've never been too big of a fan of. That's also why I didn't really like that happening with TI. I didn't really like it happening with Rose now. Though, admittedly, maybe I've jumped on that train a bit out of salt, out of reasons. But honestly, I kind of regret doing that as well, because especially if you're already feeling down about like how you're doing in this game, it can actually affect you.
Yes.
For sure. But I
It's
think
not.
I think that covers that.
I would agree.
That quite well.